The scent of wolfsbane and lavender hung in the air, mingling with the heady perfumes of 100 she-wolves dressed in their finest. The great hall of the northern pack glowed amber with torchlight, casting long shadows that danced across stone walls, adorned with ancient tapestries depicting the first shifting ceremonies. My hands trembled as I smoothed down the silvery fabric of my ceremonial dress, a hand-me-down from my cousin, who had been successfully claimed 3 seasons ago. The material felt rough against my skin, a constant reminder that I didn't belong here. "Stand straighter, Eleanor," my aunt hissed, her fingers digging into my shoulder as she positioned me among the line of unclaimed females. "For the goddess's sake, try to look desirable for once." I bit my lip and forced my spine to straighten, though it did little to make me feel worthy of attention. At 23, I was the oldest unclaimed female in the northern pack, a shameful position that my aunt never let me forget. 3 previous mating ceremonies had come and gone, and each time I had stood against the wall, watching as stronger, more beautiful she-wolves were selected by powerful males. The whispers followed me everywhere. Half-blood, too human, barely shifts. They weren't wrong. My mother had been human, my father a wolf from a neighboring pack who had broken pack law to mate with her. Neither had survived the fury of the northern alpha when their transgression was discovered. Only my father's sister's reluctant protection had kept me alive, though her resentment for the burden I represented had grown with each passing year. My fingers instinctively reached for the small amber pendant hanging at my throat, my mother's only legacy. Inside the translucent stone, a perfect wolfsbane flower was preserved, eternally blooming. "Remember," she had whispered the night she died, pressing the necklace into my small hands. "Sometimes what makes you different is what makes you strong. The flower that poisons the wolf also heals the human." I had never understood what she meant, but the pendant remained my talisman, the only thing that felt truly mine in a world where I was perpetually unwanted. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as the massive double doors at the far end of the hall swung open. The Alpha Council entered first. 7 men of varying ages, but identical in their radiating power. Behind them came the eligible males, warriors and hunters dressed in ceremonial leathers, their eyes already scanning the females lined up against the wall. My pulse quickened, but not with anticipation, with dread. "This is your last chance," my aunt whispered, voice sharp with warning. "If you aren't claimed tonight, you'll be relegated to servant status permanently. Is that what you want? To spend your life cleaning the Alpha's floors and warming his guests' beds when ordered?" I swallowed hard, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. The mating ceremony was supposed to be sacred, a celebration of our kind's most cherished tradition, where compatible wolves found each other through instinct and scent. But for me, it had always felt more like an auction block, my value diminishing with each passing year. The servants at least had their clearly defined roles. They weren't expected to be something they could never become. The head of the Alpha Council, a gray-bearded man named Thaddeus, raised his hands for silence. "Tonight, under the harvest moon, we continue the ancient tradition that strengthens our bloodlines and honors our ancestors. May the goddess guide each male to his rightful mate, and may our pack prosper from these unions." My eyes drifted to the servants who lined the walls, nearly invisible in their gray uniforms. They stood with downcast eyes, existing in that liminal space of being present yet unseen. Among them I noticed a man I hadn't seen before. Unlike the others, whose posture spoke of years of subservience, he stood tall, his shoulders broad beneath the simple servant's tunic. His dark hair was pulled back from a face that seemed carved from stone, all sharp angles and hidden shadows. When he shifted slightly, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, amber, like the wolves, but with a depth that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. He must have felt my stare because his gaze suddenly locked with mine. Instead of looking away as servants were required to do, he held my gaze with an intensity that made my breath catch. A servant who looked at a potential mate this way would be severely punished, yet he seemed unconcerned with protocol. Before I could dwell on this strange servant, the ceremony began. One by one, eligible males stepped forward, following instinct and scent to choose their mates. Some females were claimed immediately, led away by proud males to complete the mating bond privately. Others waited anxiously, hoping to be chosen by someone powerful enough to elevate their status. As the crowd thinned, my anxiety grew. But this time, unlike previous ceremonies, something had changed. I noticed several high-ranking warriors glancing in my direction, their expressions curious rather than dismissive. One in particular, Damon, the pack's most celebrated fighter, began moving purposefully toward me. Panic rose in my throat. Damon was known for his cruelty to those he considered beneath him, which had always included me. His interest could only mean one thing. He had learned of a recent development that I'd tried desperately to hide. My wolf, dormant for so long, had finally emerged during the last full moon. The shift had been painful and incomplete, but word had spread that the half-blood could finally transform. Now, instead of being entirely worthless, I was a curiosity, a novelty to be claimed and dominated. Damon's eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on me as he approached. "The runt finally became a real wolf," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Perhaps you'll make an amusing diversion, at least until I tire of you." I backed away, bumping into other waiting females who quickly distanced themselves from me. Damon's reputation was well known. His previous mate had mysteriously fallen from a cliff after displeasing him. The Alpha Council had cleared him of wrongdoing, but everyone knew the truth. His eyes now held the same predatory gleam I imagined she had seen before her death. My voice failed me as he reached out to grasp my arm. "You should be grateful," he hissed, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. "No one else would take damaged goods." In that moment, pure instinct took over. My human side might be weak, but it possessed something my wolf side didn't: the ability to recognize true danger and act against hierarchical constraints. Without thinking through the consequences, I wrenched away from Damon's grip and lunged toward the wall of servants. The room fell silent. No female had ever rejected a claiming approach. It simply wasn't done. But I wasn't thinking about pack protocol or the punishment that would surely follow. I was thinking only of escape. I crashed into the tall, dark-haired servant I'd noticed earlier, wrapping my arms around his waist in what must have looked like an embrace, but was really a desperate attempt to steady myself before running for the doors. The servant went rigid, and for a heartbeat, the entire hall seemed frozen in shock. Then the world erupted in chaos. A roar of outrage came from behind me. Damon, his pride wounded, lunging forward. But before he could reach us, an even more terrifying sound filled the hall. A deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. It came from the man I was clutching. Strong arms wrapped around me, not to push me away as I'd expected, but to draw me closer. The servant's scent enveloped me. Forest pine after rainfall, wild honey, and something ancient and primal that made my newly awakened wolf stir within me. It was a scent that spoke of mountains and deep forests, of freedom and power beyond anything I'd ever known. Mine. The word rumbled from his chest, so quiet that only I could hear it, but it sent shivers racing across my skin. Damon skidded to a halt, his face contorting in confusion before recognition dawned. His expression transformed from rage to terror in an instant. Around us, gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. The man holding me turned slightly, keeping one arm firmly around my waist while facing the assembled pack. Only then did I notice that the Alpha Council had dropped to their knees, heads bowed in deference. The eligible males quickly followed suit, even Damon, though his submission looked pained. "What is happening?" I whispered, trying to pull away, but the man's grip remained firm, almost possessive. Thaddeus, head of the council, looked up with wide eyes. "Your Majesty, we had no word of your arrival. The Northern Pack is honored by your presence." "Your Majesty?" I stared up at the man I'd thought was a servant, truly seeing him for the first time. The simple gray tunic couldn't hide the regal bearing, the air of absolute authority that emanated from him. His amber eyes, when they looked down at me, held centuries of power. "The servant," I stammered. "You're not." His lips curved in a smile that transformed his severe features into something heart-stoppingly beautiful. "No, little wolf, I am not a servant. Thaddeus rose cautiously to his feet. "May I present His Majesty, King Dominic Blackthorn, Alpha of Alphas, ruler of the 7 territories. The Alpha King. The most powerful shifter in existence, and I had just grabbed him like a human child clinging to a security blanket. This female has claimed sanctuary with me," the king announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "By ancient law, her choice supersedes all other claims." Damon's face flushed with humiliation and rage. "She is nothing. A half-breed who could barely shift until a month ago." The king's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Are you questioning my judgment, warrior?" Damon paled, immediately dropping his gaze. "No, Your Majesty." The king's attention returned to me, his eyes searching my face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "What is your name?" "Eleanor," I whispered, then added, "Eleanor Gray." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Impossible. Why would the Alpha King know anything about a half-blood nobody from a minor northern pack? "Eleanor Gray," he repeated, my name sounding like an incantation on his lips. "You have made your choice before these witnesses. Do you understand what that means?" I didn't. I had acted on desperate instinct, not knowledge of some ancient law, but looking into his eyes, I suddenly knew with absolute certainty that whatever fate awaited me with this dangerous, powerful man was preferable to the one Damon had planned for me. "Yes," I lied, chin lifting slightly. "I understand." The king's smile widened, revealing a flash of sharp canines. "Then the mating ceremony is concluded." He turned to Thaddeus. "Prepare quarters for me and my chosen. We will remain until the moon sets." As he led me from the hall, my aunt's face was a mask of shock, and the whispers that followed us were no longer mocking, but filled with awe and envy. The pendant at my throat seemed to warm against my skin, my mother's words echoing in my memory. "Sometimes what makes you different is what makes you strong." I had no idea what I had done or what would happen next. But for the first time in my life, I walked through the Northern Pack's Great Hall, with my head held high, the most powerful wolf in the world at my side, and somewhere deep inside, my wolf howled in triumph. The king's hand rested at the small of my back as he guided me through corridors I'd walked 1,000 times before. Tonight they felt foreign, the same stone walls witnessing a completely different Eleanor than the one who had scrubbed their surfaces and ducked into shadows whenever pack members passed by. Servants and pack members alike flattened themselves against the walls as we passed, heads bowed in deference. Their eyes, though lowered, followed my movement with naked curiosity, and from some, unmistakable hostility. I caught fragments of whispered conversations. Half-blood, Alpha King, impossible, that mirrored the chaos in my own mind. King Dominic Blackthorn seemed oblivious to the stir he was causing, or perhaps he was simply accustomed to it. His focus remained entirely on me, his touch guiding rather than controlling, though the barely restrained power in his movements reminded me of a predator practicing extraordinary patience. "Your heart is racing, little wolf," he murmured, his voice pitched so only I could hear. "Are you afraid of me?" Was I? The question gave me pause. Fear seemed too simple a word for the cocktail of emotions surging through me. Awe, confusion, a strange exhilaration, and yes, a healthy dose of terror. This man could crush me with a single command, yet he had also, inexplicably, saved me from Damon. "I don't know what I am," I answered honestly, "or what happens now." We reached the guest quarters reserved for visiting dignitaries, a part of the pack house I'd only entered to clean. 2 guards immediately stepped aside from a large wooden door, carved with the symbols of all 7 werewolf territories. "Now," the king said, opening the door and ushering me inside. "We talk." The room beyond was spacious but sparsely decorated, clearly prepared in haste for its unexpected royal occupant. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting warm light over a sitting area with 2 chairs, a large 4-poster bed dominating the far wall, and a table already laden with food and wine. I hesitated at the threshold, suddenly acutely aware of what mating ceremonies typically concluded with. The king noticed my hesitation. "You're safe here, Eleanor," he said, his tone softer than before. No harm will come to you under my protection. You have my word. I stepped inside, watching as he closed the door behind us. Alone with the Alpha King, I finally had a moment to truly look at him. He had discarded the servant's gray tunic, revealing a simple black shirt beneath that did little to conceal his powerful build. Without the hunched posture he'd affected earlier, he stood at least a head taller than me, his presence filling the room like a physical force. "Why were you disguised as a servant?" I blurted out, the question that had been burning in my mind since the revelation in the Great Hall. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Direct. I like that. He moved to the table, pouring 2 glasses of wine and offering one to me. I've found that people reveal their true nature when they believe they're speaking to someone beneath them. I wanted to observe this pack's mating ceremony without the performance that accompanies my official visits. I accepted the wine, but didn't drink, remembering all too well the warnings about accepting food or drink from powerful wolves. Such offerings often came with strings attached, magical or otherwise. The king noticed this too, his amber eyes narrowing slightly before he raised his own glass to his lips. Not poisoned, I assure you, though your caution is commendable. Why would the Alpha King care about a Northern Pact ceremony? I persisted, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He gestured to one of the chairs. Sit, please. This may be a long conversation. I perched on the edge of the seat, back straight, every muscle tense with anticipation. The king took the chair opposite, his posture relaxed, yet still emanating that unmistakable air of authority. I've been touring all 7 territories, he explained, swirling the wine in his glass. There have been concerns about how some packs are conducting their traditions, reports of females being claimed against their will, of abuse disguised as dominance. His eyes lifted to mine, intense and searching. What I witnessed tonight with the warrior Damon confirmed those reports. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. Damon has a reputation. Yes, he does. One that should have resulted in his execution long ago. The king's voice remained conversational, but a dangerous edge had crept in. Tell me, Eleanor Gray, how does a half-blood survive in a pack like this one? The question caught me off guard. I had expected demands, perhaps even punishment for my unconventional behavior at the ceremony. Not this apparent interest in my insignificant existence. I keep my head down, I answered carefully. I do what's required of me. I try not to be noticed. Yet tonight you made the most noticeable move possible. He leaned forward slightly. Why? I thought of Damon's cruel smile, of the stories about his previous mate's accident, because sometimes survival means running from one danger into another. I said softly. I didn't know who you were. I just knew I couldn't let him touch me. The king's expression shifted, something like approval flickering across his features. Your wolf recognized what your human mind couldn't know, he said. That's rare in one with mixed blood. My hand unconsciously moved to the amber pendant at my throat, a gesture of self-comfort I'd developed over years of uncertainty. The king's gaze followed the movement, his eyes narrowing on the wolfsbane preserved within the stone. Where did you get that? He asked sharply. I hesitated, protective instincts flaring. The pendant was my only connection to my mother. The only thing of hers I had managed to keep hidden from those who would have destroyed all evidence of her existence. It was my mother's, I finally answered, not seeing any benefit in lying to a man who could probably smell deceit. And who was your mother, Eleanor? There it was, the question I'd been asked 100 times, usually followed by sneers of disgust when I gave the only answer I had. Her name was Lily Gray. She was human. I lifted my chin slightly, bracing for the usual reaction of contempt. Instead, the king set down his wineglass with deliberate care. And your father? Nathaniel Reed. He was from the Eastern Ridge Pack. I rarely spoke my father's name aloud. It had been forbidden after his execution. They weren't supposed to be together. It's forbidden for wolves to mate with humans. Yes, the king said, his voice suddenly distant, as if his mind had traveled elsewhere. An ancient law, created to protect both species. He refocused on me with an intensity that made me want to shrink into the chair. Tell me what you know about them, how they met, what happened. I took a sip of wine, needing the moment to gather my thoughts. No one had ever asked about my parents with anything but disdain. Certainly no one had wanted to hear their story. They met in a border town where humans and wolves coexist, though the humans don't know what walks among them. My father was a scout, patrolling the territory. My mother was an herbalist. I smiled faintly at the few precious memories I had managed to preserve. She knew what he was almost immediately. She said he moved differently than human men, that his eyes reflected light in ways theirs didn't. The king remained utterly still, listening with an attention that felt almost reverent. They kept their relationship secret for years. When she became pregnant with me, they knew they couldn't stay in the borderlands. My father brought her here, to his sister, hoping for sanctuary until they could travel to the unclaimed territories in the far north. My voice faltered as I reached the part of the story that still haunted my dreams. But the Alpha discovered them. My father was executed for breaking pack law. My mother, they said she died in childbirth. But my aunt told me once, when she was deep in her cups, that they had denied her the medicines that might have saved her. Something dangerous flashed in the king's eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. And you were raised by your father's sister? I nodded. Reluctantly. She made it clear that taking me in was her penance for her brother's sins. She hoped I would never shift, that the human blood would be dominant. But it wasn't. No. Though it took much longer than usual. Most wolves shift by 16. I didn't manage even a partial transformation until last month. Even now, it's incomplete. The king sat back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't interpret. "Show me," he said finally. "What? Your wolf. Show me." Panic fluttered in my chest. I can't. Not on command. And it's not. She's not. I struggled to explain the shameful reality of my transformation. How unlike the swift, graceful shifts of full-blooded werewolves, my change was painful, awkward, and partial at best. "Eleanor," the king said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I won't judge what I see. I just need to understand." Something in his tone, in the earnestness of his request, made me want to try. I set down my wine glass and moved to the center of the room, putting distance between us. The few times I had managed to shift had been under extreme duress, or during the full moon when the pull was strongest. Doing so voluntarily, under the scrutinizing gaze of the most powerful alpha in existence, seemed impossible. I closed my eyes, searching for that wild, feral part of me that had awakened so recently. For most of my life, I had felt only its absence, a hollow space where my wolf should have been. Now I could sense her, a presence curled deep within, half-formed but undeniably real. "She's afraid," I whispered, eyes still closed. "She doesn't know if she can trust you." "Look at me," the king commanded softly. I opened my eyes to find him kneeling before me, his position deliberately non-threatening despite the power that radiated from him. He extended his hand, palm up. "Your wolf knows who I am, Eleanor. Let her see me." I reached tentatively for that wild presence within, coaxing rather than commanding. The first ripple of transformation sent pain shooting along my spine. I gasped, stumbling backward, but the king was suddenly there, his hands steady on my shoulders. "Don't fight it," he murmured. "The pain comes from resistance." Easy for him to say. Full-blooded wolves slipped between forms effortlessly, their bodies designed for the change. Mine felt like it was being torn in two directions, neither fully human nor fully wolf. But there was something in the king's presence, some primal authority that called to my wolf, urging her forward. I felt the familiar burning sensation as my bones began to shift, my skin prickling as fur tried to emerge. But as always, the transformation stalled halfway, leaving me caught in that agonizing middle ground. I dropped to my knees, shame washing over me as I realized what the king was seeing. Not the magnificent wolf that should have emerged, but this broken, halfway thing. My hands had elongated into something between human fingers and wolf paws, my face partially transformed with a hint of muzzle, my eyes burning with the gold of a wolf's gaze, but the rest of me stubbornly human. "I'm sorry," I choked out, the words distorted by my partially transformed mouth. "This is all I can do." The king knelt before me, and to my shock, he reached out and gently cupped my face in his hands. "Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with something that sounded remarkably like wonder. Do you have any idea what you are? Before I could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. The king was on his feet in an instant, positioning himself between me and the door. I struggled to pull my partial shift back, forcing my wolf to retreat, hating how slowly my body responded. The door burst open without a knock, and Thaddeus rushed in, his face ashen. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. There's been an attack at the eastern border. 3 of our warriors are dead. The king's posture changed subtly. The man who had spoken so gently to me moments ago replaced by the ruler of 7 territories. What kind of attack? Rogues, sire. At least a dozen. They breached the boundary stones and left this. Thaddeus held out a blood-stained piece of fabric. The king took it, his expression hardening as he examined the symbol painted on it. The Crimson Dawn, he said flatly. They grow bolder. I had managed to shift back fully to human form, though my limbs still trembled with the aftermath. The Crimson Dawn was spoken of only in whispers, even in our isolated northern pack, a cult of werewolves who rejected pack structure and the authority of the Alpha King, who believed that wolves should rule over humans rather than live in secret alongside them. The king turned to me, his expression unreadable. Rest here. I must attend to this. To Thaddeus, he added, Post guards. No one enters without my express permission. Thaddeus bowed, his eyes flickering to me with poorly disguised confusion, clearly wondering why the king would concern himself with protecting a half-blood. After they left, I moved to the window, looking out at the moon rising over the pine forest that surrounded the pack house. My fingers found the amber pendant again, seeking comfort in its familiar contours. Tonight had upended everything I thought I knew about my place in the world. The king's question echoed in my mind. Do you have any idea what you are? I didn't. I had always been defined by what I was not. Not fully wolf, not fully human, not worthy of a place in either world. For the first time, I wondered if there might be something more to my existence than simply being caught between 2 worlds. Outside, I could hear the pack mobilizing, the sound of running feet, shouted orders, the howls of wolves preparing for battle. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that whatever fragile safety the king's protection had granted me might be as fleeting as the night itself. I paced the confines of the guest quarters, each minute of the king's absence stretching into hours. The sounds of the pack's mobilization had faded, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional hurried footsteps passing my door. The guards outside remained steadfast, their presence a reminder that I was as much prisoner as protected. Sleep was impossible. My body still hummed with the aftermath of the partial shift, and my mind raced with questions about everything that had happened. The king had looked at my broken, half-formed wolf, not with disgust, but with something that had seemed like recognition, as if he'd seen something in my deformity that I couldn't perceive myself. Do you have any idea what you are? The question haunted me as I moved restlessly around the room, examining and re-examining the few personal belongings the king had left behind. A leather-bound book written in a script I couldn't decipher, a silver dagger etched with the same 7 territorial symbols as the door, a cloak of surprisingly simple design, despite the obvious quality of its material. Outside the window, the moon had reached its zenith, bathing the forest in silver light. Somewhere in those woods, the king and the pack warriors were hunting rogues, or being hunted themselves. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the night air. A soft knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. It wasn't the commanding rap I would expect from the king or his guards. "Who is it?" I called, moving closer to the window in case I needed to flee. The drop was significant, but not impossible for someone with even my limited werewolf abilities. "It's Mira," came the whispered reply. "Please, Eleanor, I need to speak with you." Mira, the pack healer's apprentice, and perhaps the closest thing I had to a friend, though our interactions had always been cautious, limited by her position and my lack of one. Still, she had slipped me healing salves when my aunt's discipline had been particularly harsh, had shared her bread with me when others would have let me go hungry. I glanced toward the door, hesitating. "The guards, they've been called to the eastern perimeter." she whispered urgently. Please, there isn't much time. Against my better judgment, I crossed to the door and opened it a crack. Mira stood in the corridor, her dark hair disheveled, her eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in her before. Without waiting for an invitation, she slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. You shouldn't be here, I said, though I was genuinely glad to see a familiar face that wasn't contorted with hatred or confusion. The king ordered. The king isn't here, she interrupted, her voice tight with tension. And you need to leave before he returns. I blinked at her in surprise. Leave? Why would I? Because he's not what he seems, Eleanor. Her hands gripped my arms with surprising strength. The attack, the rogues, it's a diversion. I overheard Thaddeus speaking with the council. The king has been hunting for something, or someone, for months. That's why he's been touring the territories, observing mating ceremonies. What does that have to do with me? Mira's gaze dropped to the amber pendant at my throat. Everything. Did you tell him about your mother, about the pendant? A cold dread settled in my stomach. How do you know about my mother? Mira's expression softened with sympathy. Because my grandmother was the midwife who attended her birth and her death. She touched the pendant gently. This isn't just any wolfsbane preserved in amber, Eleanor. It's from the sacred grove, the birthplace of the first werewolves. Only the royal bloodline can handle such things without harm. My head swam with confusion. That's impossible. My mother was human. Was she? Mira challenged softly. Or was that just what you were told? What everyone was told? The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I moved to the bed, sitting heavily on its edge as the implications of Mira's words sank in. If what you're saying is true, then my mother was a descendant of the original royal line. Yes, Mira knelt before me, her expression urgent. The Crimson Dawn has been hunting the lost royal bloodline for generations, seeking to eliminate any potential threat to their eventual rule. The king has been hunting them too, but for different reasons. I shook my head, struggling to absorb these revelations. If my mother was from the royal line, why was she living as a human? Why didn't she have a pack? And why would the king care about finding her descendants now? Mira's eyes darted to the door, her anxiety palpable. The royal line was scattered centuries ago during the Great Purge, when the Crimson Dawn first rose to power. Some fled to human settlements, hiding their true nature even from their children. As for why the king searches now, she hesitated, lowering her voice even further. The king has no heir, Eleanor. No mate. The royal bloodline is nearly extinct, and without it, the magic that binds the 7 territories will fade. When that happens, the Crimson Dawn will strike in force. I touched the amber pendant, seeing it with new eyes, not just a keepsake from my mother, but a symbol of a heritage I'd never known existed. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? Because I swore an oath to your mother as she died. Mira's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My grandmother made me promise to watch over you, to protect you until the time was right. She knew this day would come. What day? What are you talking about? The day you would have to choose between claiming your birthright and running from it. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. The king will use you, Eleanor. He needs your bloodline to strengthen his reign, to produce heirs that can maintain the territorial magic. You'll be nothing more than a vessel for the continuation of his power. The harsh assessment struck me like a physical blow, of course. Why else would the Alpha King show interest in a half-blood nobody? Not because he saw something special in me, but because he needed what ran in my veins. I began, but Mira cut me off with a raised hand, her head tilted as if listening. They're returning, she whispered. You need to decide now. I can help you escape through the old tunnels beneath the pack house. We can be miles away by dawn. The offer was tempting. I had dreamed of escape for as long as I could remember. Freedom from the contempt and abuse that had defined my existence in the northern pack. But something held me back, a nagging doubt about Mira's story and her sudden appearance. How did you know I was with the king? I asked slowly. How did you know what had happened at the ceremony? A flicker of something, annoyance, impatience, crossed Mira's features before her expression smoothed into concern once more. The entire pack knows, Eleanor. It's all anyone can talk about. The half-blood who dared to claim sanctuary with the Alpha King. That made sense, but something still felt wrong. The king's words echoed in my memory. Your wolf recognized what your human mind couldn't know. I had acted on instinct when I'd grabbed him at the ceremony, driven by fear of Damon but guided by something deeper. That same instinct now whispered caution. I need a moment, I said, moving toward the small adjoining bathroom, to gather my things. Mira nodded, though tension radiated from her slender frame. Hurry, we don't have much time. In the bathroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, my thoughts in turmoil. If Mira was right, the king saw me only as a convenient solution to his dynastic problems. But if she was wrong, or lying, then leaving with her could be stepping from one danger into another far worse. My gaze fell on a small window high in the wall, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Outside, the moon cast long shadows across the grounds. Decision time. I reached for my pendant, seeking clarity in its familiar weight. As my fingers closed around the amber, a warmth spread through my palm, traveling up my arm and settling in my chest, near my heart. With it came a certainty I couldn't explain. Mira was not telling me the whole truth. Taking a deep breath, I opened the bathroom door. Mira stood by the window, her back to me, whispering something into a small black stone that glowed faintly red in her palm. She startled when I emerged, quickly concealing the stone. Ready? She asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Almost, I replied, moving to retrieve my discarded shawl from the chair near the door. I never finished the sentence. In one fluid motion, I yanked the door open and bolted into the corridor, shouting for the guards I knew wouldn't be there if Mira had been telling the truth. Silence answered my call. There's no one to help you, Eleanor, Mira said from the doorway, her voice transformed, colder, harder than I'd ever heard it. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I backed away, heart pounding. Who are you, really? Her lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. I told you, I'm Mira. No. I shook my head. The real Mira would know that my mother died long before I was born. She couldn't have made any deathbed promises about me. For a moment, shock registered on her face before it smoothed into a mask of calculation. Clever little half-breed, she said, all pretense of friendship gone. I suppose there's no harm in telling you now. I am Mira, but I serve the Crimson Dawn, not your precious king. As she spoke, her features began to shift, not into a wolf, but into someone else entirely, the bone structure changing, the eye color darkening from hazel to deep brown. A skinwalker, rare and feared even among werewolves for their ability to take on the appearance of specific individuals. The real Mira is already dead, she continued conversationally, advancing slowly. Along with the guards who were supposed to be protecting you, the king's forces are engaged with our decoys miles from here, leaving you completely unprotected. I continued backing away, mind racing for a solution. The corridor stretched behind me, leading deeper into the pack house. If I could reach the main hall, perhaps someone would hear my cries for help. Why does the Crimson Dawn want me? I asked, trying to buy time. If what you said about my bloodline is true. Oh, that part was true, she interrupted. Your mother was indeed of the royal line, hidden away for her protection. The Crimson Dawn has spent centuries hunting down every last descendant, ensuring none could challenge our eventual rule. Her smile widened. You're the last, Eleanor, the final loose end. That explained the contempt I'd faced my entire life. Not just because I was supposedly half-human, but because someone had known the truth about my heritage and had worked to ensure I remained ignorant and powerless. Had my aunt known? Had the entire pack been complicit in keeping me downtrodden and afraid? You won't kill me, I said with more confidence than I felt. If you wanted me dead, you would have done it already. Smart girl. We don't want you dead, at least not immediately. The skinwalker's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. Your blood has other uses first. The ritual requires a living sacrifice. I broke into a run then, no longer caring about appearances or dignity. Pure survival instinct propelled me down the corridor, my bare feet silent on the stone floors. Behind me, I heard the skinwalker laugh, the sound of a predator confident in the inevitable capture of its prey. I rounded a corner and collided hard with a solid wall of muscle. Strong hands steadied me, and I found myself looking up into the amber eyes of the king. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by wariness as I remembered Mira's, or rather, the skinwalker's, warnings about his intentions. Eleanor? The king's gaze moved past me, narrowing dangerously. What's happening? Before I could answer, the skinwalker appeared around the corner. Her expression flickered from predatory confidence to shock to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. "Your Majesty," she exclaimed, dropping into a deferential curtsy. "Thank the goddess I found you. The half-blood was trying to escape. I caught her sneaking from your quarters." The king's hands remained on my shoulders, neither restraining nor releasing. His eyes moved between me and the skinwalker, his expression unreadable. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze directly. "She's lying. She's a skinwalker, working for the Crimson Dawn. She killed your guards and the real Mira. The attack at the border was a diversion to get to me." The skinwalker laughed, the sound brittle. "Absurd! Your Majesty, the girl is clearly disturbed. She's been spinning wild tales, claiming royal heritage of all things." She reached for my arm. "Let me take her to the healer. She needs—" The king moved so quickly I barely saw it. One moment standing beside me, the next with his hand around the skinwalker's throat, lifting her until her feet dangled above the floor. His eyes burned with an inner fire, his features sharpening into something not quite human, not quite wolf. "I can smell the death on you," he growled, his voice a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone beneath our feet. "The blood of my guards, the deceit in your words." The skinwalker's facade crumbled, her features twisting with hatred. "You're too late," she choked out. "The dawn rises. The sacrifice will be made. The old magic will die with the last of the royal blood." The king's grip tightened. "Where are the others?" A gurgling laugh escaped her. "Everywhere. Nowhere. We are the shadow at your back, the poison in your cup." Her gaze shifted to me, malevolence burning in her eyes. "We've been watching her for years, keeping her weak, ensuring she'd never know what she truly is." I took an involuntary step backward, my mind reeling with implications. The constant belittlement, the isolation, my delayed shifting. Had it all been deliberate? Part of some long game played by forces I hadn't even known existed? The skinwalker's body suddenly went rigid, her eyes widening in shock. Black veins spread rapidly across her skin, racing from her throat where the king's hand still gripped her. She opened her mouth in a silent scream before her body simply crumbled, collapsing into ash that drifted to the floor like dark snow. The king turned to me, the fierce light gradually fading from his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the display of lethal power I'd just witnessed. I shook my head, unable to find words. He had killed her with a touch, had transformed her living body into dust without apparent effort. "What kind of power was that?" As if reading my thoughts, he said. "An ability unique to my bloodline. Death touch, some call it. It's why I wore gloves at the ceremony." His eyes searched my face. "You didn't run with her." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "No." Something felt wrong about her story. I hesitated before adding, though parts of it made a terrible kind of sense. The king stepped closer, moving slowly as if afraid of startling me. "What did she tell you?" I swallowed hard, gathering my courage. "That my mother was of the royal bloodline. That you've been searching for descendants to secure your reign." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Is it true?" For a long moment he said nothing, his expression giving away nothing of his thoughts. Finally he sighed, a surprisingly human sound from this being of terrible power. "Some of it," he admitted, "but not in the way you think." He glanced down the empty corridor. "We can't talk here. More will come when she doesn't report back." He extended his hand, palm up. "An offer, not a command. Will you trust me, Eleanor?" Just a little longer. I looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. Despite everything, the skinwalker's warnings, the violence I'd just witnessed, the secrets still clearly being kept from me, something in me wanted to trust him. The same instinct that had driven me to grab him at the ceremony now urged me to take his hand. My wolf, recognizing what my human mind couldn't know. I placed my hand in his, feeling calluses that spoke of a life not spent solely on thrones. I don't have much choice, do I? His fingers closed gently around mine. We always have choices, little wolf. Even when none of them seem good, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Though sometimes the right choice feels like stepping off a cliff and hoping you can fly. As he led me through the darkened corridors of the pack house, away from the main halls and toward what I realized must be a secret exit, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had indeed stepped off a cliff. Whether I would fly or fall remained to be seen. We moved silently through the forest, the king leading me along paths invisible to any eyes but his. The moon had begun its descent, casting longer shadows through the pines. Neither of us had spoken since leaving the pack house through a narrow tunnel concealed behind a storage room. The night air felt cleansing after the suffocating atmosphere of secrets and lies. Each breath filled my lungs with the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the coming dawn. Despite the danger that surely pursued us, I felt strangely alive, more present in my body than I had ever been. After what seemed like hours, the king paused at the edge of a small clearing. In its center stood a circle of ancient stones, each taller than a man, and covered in symbols similar to those on the king's dagger. Moonlight pooled in the clearing as if drawn to the stones, illuminating them with an ethereal glow. "The Northern Circle," I whispered, recognition dawning. I had heard stories of these sacred sites scattered throughout the territories, places where the veil between worlds grew thin, where the first werewolves had allegedly made their pact with the moon goddess. "You know of it?" The king glanced back at me, one eyebrow raised in surprise. "Only from stories. The pack, we weren't allowed to come here. In truth, I had stumbled upon this clearing once as a child, drawn by some inexplicable pull. My aunt had found me sitting among the stones and had dragged me away, her fingers bruising my arm, her voice harsh with fear rather than anger. I had never understood her reaction until now. The king nodded as if my answer confirmed something he had suspected. "The circle recognizes its own," he said cryptically, then stepped between two of the massive stones. I hesitated at the threshold, a shiver running along my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "What are we doing here?" "Seeking answers and sanctuary." He turned, extending his hand to me once more. "The Crimson Dawn cannot enter a true circle. We'll be safe here, at least until dawn." I placed my hand in his, wondering if I would ever stop feeling that little jolt of connection when our skin touched. As I stepped between the stones, a curious sensation washed over me, like walking through a curtain of warm water that left no dampness behind. The air inside the circle felt different, somehow cleaner and more vibrant, as if each breath contained more life than those taken outside. The king led me to the center where a flat stone formed a natural altar. He released my hand to remove his cloak, spreading it on the ground beside the stone. "Rest," he said, gesturing to the makeshift bed. "You're safe here." I sank down onto the cloak, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. The events of the day, the mating ceremony, the revelations about my heritage, the skinwalker's attack, had drained me completely. Yet questions still burned in my mind, demanding answers before I could even think of sleep. "You promised me the truth," I reminded him quietly. The king settled beside me, his back against the altar stone. In the moonlight, his features seemed both harder and more vulnerable than they had in the artificial light of the pack house. "I did," he agreed, "though I'm not certain you're ready to hear it." "I'm tired of others deciding what I'm ready for," I said, an edge creeping into my voice. My entire life has been shaped by secrets others kept from me. I deserve to know the truth about what I am. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "You're right." His gaze drifted to the stars visible above the circle. What do you know about the founding of the 7 werewolf territories? The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. Only what everyone knows. The first werewolves made a pact with the moon goddess. She granted them power in exchange for their promise to protect the balance between human and wolf, never fully belonging to either world but safeguarding both. And the royal line? I shrugged. Descendants of the first alpha, blessed with greater powers to rule and unite the packs. The king's lips curved in a faint smile. A simplified version, but essentially correct. He shifted to face me directly. What the stories don't tell is that there were 2 royal lines, not one. Twin brothers who made different pacts with the goddess. My hand moved unconsciously to my pendant. 2 lines. The line of power, from which I descend, was granted dominion over death, the ability to kill with a touch, to command absolute obedience from other wolves, to rule through strength. His eyes caught the moonlight, gleaming with an inner fire. The line of life, from which you descend, received different gifts: healing, immunity to wolfsbane, and other poisons, lethal to our kind, and the ability to bear children who could shift at will between fully human and fully wolf. I stared at him, struggling to absorb this revelation. But I can barely shift at all. And I'm certainly not immune to, aren't you? He interrupted gently. That pendant you wear contains enough wolfsbane to kill a full-blooded werewolf within minutes of skin contact, yet you've worn it against your heart your entire life. I looked down at the amber pendant, seeing it with new eyes. That doesn't mean your partial shifting isn't a failure, Eleanor. It's a sign of your heritage. The royal line of life could appear completely human when they chose, or completely wolf. They weren't trapped between forms like the rest of us. The king leaned forward, his expression earnest. You haven't been failing to shift fully. You've been unconsciously controlling your shift, limiting it because some part of you knew that revealing your true nature would put you in danger. Hope and disbelief warred within me. Could it be true? Could the thing I had seen as my greatest weakness actually be a sign of a power I had never understood? If what you're saying is true, I said slowly, why didn't my mother tell my father? Why live as a human at all? Because the line of life was hunted nearly to extinction centuries ago. The king replied, his voice hardening. Not by humans, as our histories claim, but by my ancestors, the line of power. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of ancient betrayal. I drew back slightly, suddenly acutely aware of what he was. The king noticed my withdrawal, but made no move to close the distance. The twin lines were meant to rule together, bringing balance, life and death, mercy and justice, creation and destruction. But power, once tasted, is difficult to relinquish. My ancestors feared the abilities of the lifeline, particularly their immunity to the death touch. They could not be controlled through fear as other wolves could. So they were slaughtered, I whispered, horror dawning, by your family. He nodded, no attempt to soften the terrible truth. The survivors scattered, hiding among humans, passing as mortal to avoid detection. Over generations, many forgot their true nature entirely, the shifting ability becoming dormant from disuse. Until me. The pieces were falling into place now. My delayed shifting, the strange reaction when I had touched the king at the ceremony, the Crimson Dawn's determination to find me. Until you, he agreed. The last known descendant of the line of life. And that's why you were searching for me? To what? Finish what your ancestors started? The king's expression darkened. No. To undo their great sin. He rose in a fluid motion, pacing the confines of the circle. The separation of the royal lines has weakened both. Each generation, the death touch grows more unpredictable, more difficult to control. Each generation, fewer children are born to the ruling line. The territories fracture as the magic binding them fades. He stopped, turning to face me with an intensity that made my breath catch. The Crimson Dawn knows this. They've been waiting, watching the royal power diminish, planning for the moment when the territories would be vulnerable to their twisted vision of wolf supremacy. And what is your vision? I challenged, rising to my feet to meet his gaze more evenly. Why search for the last of a line your ancestors tried to destroy? Because only by reuniting the twin bloodlines can the full power of both be restored, he said simply. Balance returned. The pact with the goddess honored once more. Understanding dawned with a clarity that left me dizzy. The mating ceremony. You weren't just observing, you were hunting. My voice hardened. Looking for breeding stock. The king flinched as if I'd struck him. Is that what you think of me? What am I supposed to think? You disguised yourself, infiltrated a mating ceremony, and just happened to find the last descendant of the bloodline you need to secure your power. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth within the circle. How convenient for you. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders with a gentleness that belied the intensity in his eyes. Do you really believe our meeting was merely political calculation? Do you not feel what happens when we touch? I did feel it. The connection. The rightness that hummed between us like a perfectly tuned string. But fear and years of hard-learned suspicion made me pull away. Why should I trust anything I feel? The skinwalker said you've been hunting for months, visiting ceremonies throughout the territories. How many other females have you approached? How many have you tested before finding one with the right bloodline? The king's hands fell to his sides, his expression shuddering. None, he said flatly. You are the first female I've approached in any capacity in over 200 years. That stopped me cold. 200? How old are you? 527 years. No emotion colored his voice now. I have ruled the 7 territories for 300 of those years, and in all that time, I have never sought a mate. Why not? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Something like vulnerability flickered across his features, because I knew what I needed, what the territories needed, no longer existed. The line of life was gone, or so I believed until rumors reached me of a half-blood in the northern pack who wore wolfsbane without harm. His gaze dropped to my pendant. I came to observe only, to confirm whether the rumors might be true. I had no intention of approaching you or any other female. Then why did you help me when Damon... Because I couldn't bear to see him touch you. The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. It was instinct, not calculation. Just as it was instinct that drove you to grab me instead of any other servant in that hall. He was right, and we both knew it. In that moment of panic, I could have run to the doors, could have grabbed any of the dozen servants lining the walls. Instead, some deeper knowing had guided me directly to him, as if my wolf had recognized her counterpart, her balance, her match. The twin bloodlines call to each other, Eleanor, the king said softly. Not out of political necessity, but because they were never meant to be separated. Just as wolf calls to wolf, life calls to death, creation to destruction, balance, seeking balance. I turned away, moving to the edge of the circle where moonlight spilled between the ancient stones. His words resonated with something deep within me, something older than reason or caution. Yet fear still held me back, fear of being used, of being valued only for what ran in my veins rather than who I was. What do you want from me? I asked finally, my back still to him. I heard him sigh, a sound weighted with centuries of solitude. Nothing you aren't willing to give, he replied. I won't claim you against your will or force you into a political union. The mistakes of the past cannot be undone by repeating them. Then what? I want to teach you who you truly are, he interrupted, his voice closer now, though he hadn't moved toward me. To help you understand and control the powers you've inherited, to show you that you're not broken or incomplete, but magnificently, uniquely whole. A pause, then more quietly. And then, when you know yourself fully, when you can choose from a place of strength rather than fear, I want you to decide if what exists between us is worth exploring. I turned slowly to face him, startled to find unshed tears glistening in his eyes. This powerful being, this alpha of alphas who had lived for centuries and ruled 7 territories with absolute authority, stood before me with his heart exposed, asking, not demanding, hoping, not taking. And if I choose to walk away, I asked, needing to know that the choice was truly mine. Then I will ensure your safety from the Crimson Dawn and any others who might wish you harm, and I will respect your decision. The sorrow in his smile spoke volumes. I have waited 5 centuries, Eleanor Gray. I can wait longer if necessary. Before I could respond, a howl shattered the night's quiet, closer than comfort would allow, raw with bloodlust and hunger. Others joined it, a chorus of voices that seemed to surround the clearing. "They've found us," the king said, his posture shifting instantly from vulnerability to lethal readiness. "The Crimson Dawn." I moved closer to him, fear gripping me as dark shapes appeared between the trees beyond the circle. "You said they couldn't enter here." "They can't. But they can wait us out." His eyes scanned the tree line, counting. "At least 24, more than I anticipated. What do we do?" The king turned to me, decision hardening his features. "I'll draw them away from the circle. Once they're gone, you run east until you reach the river. Follow it north to the borderlands. There's a cabin there." "No," I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. "I won't run anymore." He frowned. "Eleanor, this isn't the time for... My whole life I've been running or hiding," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Keeping my head down, trying not to be noticed. And where has it gotten me? Nowhere. The Crimson Dawn still found me. They've been watching me, keeping me weak, all this time. I straightened, something shifting within me, not my wolf rising, but something older, deeper. If what you say is true, if I truly am the last of the line of life, then it's time I stopped hiding from that truth. The king studied my face, searching for any sign of doubt. "They'll kill you if they can," he warned. "Or worse. Then we'll just have to make sure they can't." I reached for the amber pendant, the symbol that had connected me to a heritage I hadn't known was mine. As my fingers closed around it, warmth spread through my palm, up my arm, settling in my chest near my heart. The same sensation I'd felt when trying to determine if the skinwalker was telling the truth. The king watched, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You can feel it, can't you? The power that's always been within you, waiting." I nodded, unable to put into words the certainty that suddenly filled me. "Show me how to use it." A slow smile spread across his face. Not the diplomatic smile of a king, but the fierce grin of a wolf who has found its pack. "The power of life cannot be taught by death," he said. "It can only be awakened by necessity and accepted by choice." He took my hand, pressing my palm against his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. "But I can show you how to stop fighting what you are." Outside the circle, the howls grew closer, more frenzied. Through the trees, red eyes gleamed, watching, waiting. The Crimson Dawn, come to extinguish the last ember of the bloodline that threatened their rise to power. "Close your eyes," the king murmured. "Find your wolf." I did as he asked, searching for that wild presence within. But this time, instead of coaxing or commanding, I simply acknowledged her, accepted her as part of me, neither dominant nor submissive, but equal, complementary, balance. The transformation began without pain for the first time, a ripple of warmth rather than the burning agony I'd grown to expect. It flowed through me like water, natural and effortless, my body reshaping itself not into the partial, broken form I'd known before, but something new, something complete. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed, sharper, clearer, filled with scents and sounds my human form could never have perceived. I looked down to see not the misshapen half-shift of before, but sleek white fur covering powerful limbs. A wolf. A true wolf. The king, Dominic, stared at me with wonder and what could only be described as reverence. "The white wolf," he whispered. "The sign of the goddess's favor, not seen in the royal line for centuries." I moved experimentally, marveling at the strength and grace of this form that had eluded me for so long. It felt right. Natural. Not a transformation, but a homecoming. Dominic shed his human form with fluid ease, his body flowing from man to massive black wolf in the space of a heartbeat. Where I was light, he was shadow. Where I was slender quickness, he was immense power. Perfect counterpoints, perfect balance. The howls outside the circle rose to a fevered pitch as our transformations completed. The Crimson Dawn could sense the power awakening within the stone boundary. the reunion of bloodlines they had worked for centuries to keep apart. Dominic padded to my side, pressing his massive form against mine in a gesture of solidarity and protection. I felt rather than heard his thoughts. We faced them together, or not at all. I answered with a brush of my muzzle against his. Together. As one, we moved to the edge of the circle, facing the red-eyed watchers in the darkness. Dawn approached, the sky lightening imperceptibly in the east. Soon the moon would set, and with it, some of the protection offered by the sacred stones. The largest of the rogues stepped forward, his form more monster than wolf, twisted and oversized, the result of dark rituals and forbidden magic. His thoughts brushed against mine, oily and invasive. Give up, last daughter. Your line ends tonight, one way or another. I felt Dominic tense beside me, rage building at the threat. His death touch would not work from within the circle. The sacred space contained all magic, both dark and light. Once we stepped beyond the stones, we would be immediately set upon by overwhelming numbers. Yet something told me we didn't need to leave the circle to fight this battle. The stones themselves had recognized me, Dominic had said. The circle knows its own. I let my awareness expand, reaching not outward, but downward into the earth beneath my paws. Ancient power thrummed there, dormant but not dead, waiting for the call of the bloodline that had helped create it. The line of life, connected to the land itself, to growing things, to the slow, patient magic of creation, rather than destruction. Beside me, I felt Dominic doing the same, reaching for the power of his lineage, the swift, decisive force of endings and boundaries. Life and death, creation and destruction, twin forces meant to work in harmony, now united after centuries of separation. As our awareness touched, something extraordinary happened. The stones of the circle began to glow, not with moonlight now, but with an inner fire that pulsed in time with our heartbeats. The rogue wolves backed away, unnerved by the display of power they hadn't anticipated. Take my strength. Dominic's thoughts brushed against mine. I will take yours. Balance restored. I opened myself to him completely, feeling his centuries of power and knowledge flow into me as my innate connection to life and creation flowed into him. The glow from the stones intensified, spiraling upward in ribbons of light, silver from me, obsidian from him, twining together as they rose toward the fading stars. The leader of the Crimson Dawn snarled, desperation replacing confidence. Attack! Now! Before they complete the binding. The rogues charged as one, throwing themselves against the invisible barrier of the circle. In previous times, they might have eventually worn down its protection through sheer numbers and determination. But not tonight. Not with the twin bloodlines united within, channeling power not seen since the first pact with the moon goddess. Together, Dominic and I raised our voices in a single howl. Not a challenge or a war cry, but a summoning. The ancient magic responded, the earth beneath the clearing trembling as roots burst from the ground outside the circle, entangling the rogues even as darkness descended upon them, stealing their strength, their magic, their very breath. Life creating the opportunity. Death delivering the consequence. Balance. One by one, the rogues fell, some fleeing into the forest, others collapsing where they stood, their corrupted magic no match for the united power of the royal bloodlines. Their leader was the last to fall, his red eyes fixed on me with hatred even as the darkness claimed him. This isn't over, half-blood. Others will rise. Others will hunt you. I met his gaze steadily. Let them come. We'll be waiting. As the last of the rogues disappeared into the forest or collapsed into the earth, the spiral of light surrounding Dominic and me contracted, drawing closer until it enveloped us completely. In that moment of perfect union, I saw through his eyes centuries of solitude, of searching, of hoping against hope that somewhere the other half of what had been sundered still existed. And he saw through mine years of rejection and isolation, of believing myself broken and incomplete, of clinging to a pendant and a half-remembered promise. Sometimes what makes you different is what makes you strong. When the light faded, we stood in human form once more, hands clasped between us. The clearing was empty of enemies, the forest quiet in the first light of dawn. The stones of the circle had returned to their dormant state, ancient sentinels waiting for the next time they would be called upon. "What just happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Dominic's eyes, still glowing faintly with power, met mine. "The binding," he said softly. "The reunion of the bloodlines. What was meant to happen centuries ago, before ambition and fear drove our ancestors apart." I looked down at our joined hands, noticing for the first time a faint silvery mark encircling my wrist like a bracelet of light. An identical mark, but in deepest black, adorned Dominic's wrist. Are we mated?" He smiled, lifting my hand to press a kiss against the mark. "Not yet. The binding is a beginning, not an ending. It signifies potential, possibility, the restoration of balance between our lines. What happens next is still our choice." Relief and something like disappointment mingled within me. "Then what now?" "Now," he said, his expression growing serious. "We return to the territories. There will be challenges to face, remaining Crimson Dawn cells to root out, allies to gather, a fragmented leadership to unite." His fingers tightened around mine. "And you have much to learn about your heritage, your abilities, your rightful place in our world." "And us?" I asked, the question both terrifying and exhilarating. Dominic's free hand rose to cup my cheek, his touch gentle despite the deadly power it contained. "That," he said softly, "is entirely up to you, Eleanor Gray, last daughter of the line of life." I meant what I said. I will wait as long as necessary for you to choose freely, from strength rather than fear. I leaned into his touch, the rightness of it undeniable. "And if I've already chosen?" His breath caught, hope and caution warring in his expression. "Then I would ask you to be certain. To know that I want you not for your bloodline or the magic you carry, but for the courage I saw when you defied Damon, for the cleverness that let you see through the skinwalker's lies, for the compassion that still burns in you despite years of cruelty." "And I would tell you," I replied, finding strength in vulnerability, "that I choose you not because you're the Alpha King or because our bloodlines call to each other, but because you saw me, truly saw me, when no one else ever had. Because you offered truth when others gave lies. Because you asked when you could have commanded." Slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, Dominic lowered his lips to mine. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but as my arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer, it deepened into something more, a promise, a beginning, a homecoming. When we finally broke apart, the sun had cleared the horizon, bathing the ancient stones in golden light. Outside the circle, the world waited with all its complications and challenges, but for the first time in my life, I didn't face it alone or afraid. "Come, little wolf," Dominic said, taking my hand once more. "It's time to show the 7 territories what happens when life and death work as one." As we stepped through the stones together, leaving the circle's protection for the wider world, I felt my wolf stir contentedly within me. No longer trapped between forms or caught between worlds, I was finally, completely whole, Eleanor Gray, daughter of Lily, last of the royal line of life, and now, first of a new beginning. The pendant at my throat glowed warm against my skin, my mother's words finding fulfillment at last. The flower that poisons the wolf also heals the human. What had made me different had indeed made me strong, strong enough to survive, to find my truth, to restore balance to a world that had been tilting toward darkness for centuries. And as we walked toward the rising sun, the Alpha King at my side and my heritage finally claimed, I knew that whatever challenges awaited us, we would face them as we were always meant to, together, in perfect balance. 6 months had passed since the night in the Northern Circle, though sometimes it felt like yesterday, and other times like a lifetime ago. Spring had given way to summer, and then to the first crisp days of autumn, the territories shifting from vibrant greens to a tapestry of gold and crimson. I stood on the balcony of the royal residence in the Central Territory, watching as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues that matched the changing leaves. "There you are," came Dominic's voice from behind me, warm and familiar in a way that still surprised me sometimes. "The Eastern delegation has arrived. Their alpha is particularly eager to meet you." I turned, unable to suppress the smile that rose to my lips at the sight of him. 6 months of proximity had done nothing to diminish the effect he had on me. If anything, each day had only deepened the connection that had begun in that desperate moment at the mating ceremony. "Is he eager to meet me, or eager to confirm the rumors?" I asked, smoothing down the front of my ceremonial dress, not a hand-me-down this time, but a gown crafted specifically for me, silver fabric embroidered with white wolves running beneath a full moon. Dominic's lips quirked in the half-smile I had come to treasure. "Both, I imagine. News of the White Wolf's return has spread throughout the territories. Some embrace it as the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Others see it as a threat to the established order. The established order being centuries of rule by the line of death alone, without the tempering influence of its counterpart. Not everyone was pleased to see that balance restored, particularly those who had benefited from the imbalance. I fingered the silver mark encircling my wrist, the visible sign of the binding we had undergone in the Northern Circle. Its twin, rendered in deepest black, adorned Dominic's wrist. Together they formed a physical manifestation of the renewed connection between our bloodlines, a connection that had already begun to heal fractures in the magic binding the territories. "Let them see," I said, lifting my chin with a confidence that would have been unimaginable to the Eleanor who had cowered against the wall at the Northern Pack's mating ceremony. "Let them know that the line of life has returned, and with it, a new era for our kind." Dominic crossed the balcony to stand beside me, his hand finding mine with the easy familiarity we had developed. "You've changed," he observed, though there was nothing but admiration in his tone. "Is that a bad thing?" On the contrary, his amber eyes, still capable of stealing my breath, studied my face with open affection. "It's like watching a flower unfurl toward the sun after years in shadow. You become more yourself with each passing day." It was true. The month since our escape from the Northern Pack had been filled with challenges, establishing my legitimacy among skeptical pack leaders, rooting out remaining Crimson Dawn cells, learning to control abilities I hadn't known I possessed. But each obstacle overcome had stripped away another layer of the fearful, self-doubting creature I had been. I was still learning, still growing into the role that birthright and circumstance had thrust upon me, but no longer did I question whether I was worthy of it. "Tell me about this Eastern Alpha," I said, turning back to face the sunset. "Is he friend or foe?" Dominic leaned against the balcony railing, his posture relaxed despite the diplomatic complexities awaiting us below. "Nathaniel is cautious. His pack has suffered more than most from Crimson Dawn infiltration. He lost his mate to them 3 years ago, and nearly his territory last winter." I absorbed this information, adding it to the mental map I was building of the complex political landscape we navigated daily. Then he should be receptive to our efforts to unite the territories against the remaining Dawn cells. One would think. Dominic's expression turned thoughtful. But grief can make men unpredictable. He may see our united power as merely a different kind of threat. Then we will have to convince him otherwise. I straightened my shoulders, mentally preparing for the diplomatic dance ahead. 6 months ago, the prospect of facing a pack alpha would have terrified me. Now, it was simply another duty, another opportunity to build the future we envisioned. As we turned to leave the balcony, a flash of movement in the garden below caught my eye. A small figure darted between hedgerows, followed by the slightly larger form of a young guard. I smiled, recognizing Lily, the orphaned cub we had rescued from a Crimson Dawn stronghold 3 months earlier. "Your shadow has escaped her lessons again," I noted, nodding toward the garden where Lily was now climbing an ancient oak tree with impressive agility, her young guard looking up with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. Dominic followed my gaze, his expression softening. "She reminds me of someone else who refuses to be confined by expectations." I laughed, the sound still sometimes surprising me with its freedom. Perhaps, though I was never that bold at her age. "No," he agreed, his hand finding the small of my back as we moved toward the door. But you had the same fire in you. It just needed the right conditions to burn. The comparison warmed me. Lily had become something of a project for me. A young half-blood like myself, orphaned by violence, marked as different by a heritage she hadn't chosen. In her, I saw both my past and a possible future. One where children like us weren't hidden away or made to feel ashamed of their dual nature. "I'll speak with her after the reception," I said, making a mental note to set aside time for the cub, despite the busy schedule ahead. "She needs to understand that climbing trees is perfectly acceptable, but diplomatic functions are non-negotiable. The terrible burden of royal responsibility," Dominic said with mock solemnity. "Perhaps I should have warned you about that part before the binding. Would it have changed my decision?" I asked, already knowing the answer. His expression grew serious, the playfulness fading into something deeper. "Would it have?" I reached up to touch his face, still marveling that I was allowed, encouraged even, to do so, not for a moment. The truth was, I had chosen this life, chosen him, long before I fully understood what either entailed. That night in the Northern Circle had merely formalized what my wolf had recognized from the first moment. That together, we formed something greater than either of us could be alone. Of course, recognition and reality were different things. The weeks following our dramatic stand against the Crimson Dawn had been tumultuous. Dominic had kept his word, insisting that despite the binding, I needed time to learn who I truly was before making any irrevocable decisions about us. He had installed me in my own quarters in the royal residence, provided tutors to teach me territory history and politics, and arranged for the surviving elders of the line of life to emerge from hiding to guide my awakening abilities. It had been a time of discovery, learning to shift at will between human and wolf forms, developing my innate gift for healing, understanding the deeper magics that connected our kind to the land itself. And throughout it all, Dominic had been there, patient, supportive, never pushing but always present. 3 months to the day after the Northern Circle, I had gone to his chambers in the dead of night. No words had been necessary. He had opened the door as if he'd been waiting, as if he'd known I was coming. Perhaps he had. The bond between us had grown stronger with each passing day, a connection that transcended the physical, that resonated on some deeper, more essential level. That night, we had completed what the binding had begun. The formal mating that united not just our bloodlines, but our souls. The silver and black marks on our wrists had flared with inner light as we came together, the ancient magic recognizing and celebrating the reunion of what had been too long divided. "We should go down," I said, reluctantly drawing back to reality. "The Eastern delegation will be waiting, and it wouldn't do for the newly united royal line to keep them wondering if the rumors are true." Dominic caught my hand as I turned toward the door, bringing it to his lips for a brief kiss that sent shivers racing along my spine despite its chasteness. "Let them wonder a little longer," he murmured against my skin. "It keeps them humble," I laughed, shaking my head at his playful arrogance. 5 centuries of absolute power have made you impossible. You know that? Perhaps." His eyes gleamed with mischief and something warmer, more intimate. "But now I have you to keep me in check. Balance in all things, remember? Balance. The word that had come to define our union, our purpose, our shared vision for the future of the 7 territories. Life and death, creation and destruction, mercy and justice, complementary forces working in harmony rather than opposition." As we made our way through the royal residence toward the grand reception hall, I felt the weight of eyes following us. Some curious, some wary, some openly hostile. Not everyone welcomed the changes our union had begun. The Crimson Dawn had been driven underground but not eliminated entirely, and even among those who rejected their extremist views, change was often met with resistance. I had learned to walk with my head high despite the whispers, to wear the mantle of my heritage with pride rather than shame. The half-blood girl who had pressed herself against walls hoping to become invisible was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that visibility, that standing as a living embodiment of what was possible when bloodlines united, rather than divided, was perhaps her greatest power. The grand reception hall fell silent as we entered. hundreds of eyes turning to watch our progress toward the dais where the formal greetings would take place. I spotted the Eastern delegation immediately, a group of about 20 wolves standing slightly apart from the others, their formal attire marked with the emblem of their territory, a rising sun over mountain peaks. At their center stood a man who could only be Alpha Nathaniel, tall and broad-shouldered like most of his kind, but with a solemnity etched into his features that spoke of the losses Dominic had mentioned. His gaze swept over us, assessing, calculating, lingering on the marks at our wrists and the white blonde hair that marked me as different even among the royal line. As we reached the dais, the traditional greetings began. Formal acknowledgments of territory boundaries, ritual recognition of pack hierarchies, ceremonial offerings to symbolize peaceful intentions. I performed my part with a grace that had been hard-won through months of practice, though I still occasionally caught flashes of surprise from those who had expected the rumored half-blood to stumble through the complex protocols. When the formal rituals concluded, Alpha Nathaniel stepped forward for the more personal greeting that would establish the tone for the negotiations ahead. He bowed to Dominic with precisely the correct depth to acknowledge his status, while maintaining his own dignity as a territory leader. "The Eastern Pack welcomes the renewal of ancient alliances," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "We have heard much of the changes taking place within the territories." "Change is the only constant in any world, Alpha Nathaniel," Dominic replied, the diplomatic response masking the steel beneath. "Though some changes merely restore what should never have been lost." Nathaniel's gaze shifted to me, his expression carefully neutral. "The return of the line of life has been unexpected." I met his eyes directly, neither challenging nor submitting. "Sometimes the most important truths hide in plain sight, waiting to be recognized." Something flickered in the Eastern Alpha's expression, a brief crack in the diplomatic mask. He studied me more intently, a frown forming between his brows. "You seem familiar to me, though I'm certain we've never met." A murmur rippled through the gathered witnesses. I maintained my composure, though internally I noted the observation with interest. "Perhaps you knew others of my line, before they were forced into hiding." Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "No, it's more specific than that." His gaze moved from my face to the pendant at my throat, my mother's legacy, the wolfsbane preserved in amber that I still wore despite having access to the finest jewels in 7 territories. His eyes widened, recognition dawning like a physical blow. "That pendant," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I gave one identical to it to a human woman, an herbalist in the borderlands many years ago. Her name was Lily Gray," I finished, my heart suddenly pounding. "My mother." The hall erupted in whispers, the formal decorum of the reception dissolving as pack members turned to one another in confusion and speculation. I barely noticed, my attention fixed entirely on the Eastern Alpha whose face had drained of color. "Impossible," he breathed. "The child died with her." "I was told." "You were told what the Northern Alpha wanted you to believe," Dominic interjected, his hand finding mine in silent support. "Just as Eleanor was told her father died in execution." Nathaniel Reed, the name my aunt had given me when I had asked about my father, the Eastern Ridge Pack, she had said, executed for breaking pack law. "You're my father," I said softly, the realization simultaneously earth-shattering and oddly fitting, as if some part of me had always known, had always recognized the absence shaped exactly like the man standing before me. Nathaniel's composure cracked entirely, his diplomatic mask falling away to reveal raw emotion. "My daughter died," he repeated, though the conviction in his voice had wavered. "I searched for years, until the Northern Alpha showed me a grave. A tiny grave." "A deception," Dominic said, his voice hard with controlled anger. "One of many perpetrated to keep the bloodlines separated, to prevent what was always meant to be." He lifted our joined hands, the silver and black marks clearly visible. "But no deception can stand forever against truth." Nathaniel's gaze moved between us, between the marks on our wrists, between the pendant at my throat, and the features of my face that I now realized might mirror his own. "If this is true," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "if you are truly my daughter with Lily, Then the line of life didn't survive by chance, I finished for him, understanding blooming. It survived because you, a member of the Eastern Royal House, a distant cousin to the ruling line, carried enough of the ancient bloodline that when combined with my mother's human heritage, it created something unique, something both more and less than wolf, something that could hide in plain sight. The revelation settled over the hall like a physical presence, if true, and I knew with bone-deep certainty that it was. Then my heritage was even more complex than we had realized, not just the lost line of life, but a deliberate blending of bloodlines that had created something new, something that bridged worlds in ways no one had anticipated. Nathaniel took a step toward me, his hand half raised as if to touch my face, but stopping short. Uncertain of his welcome, "I named you," he whispered. "Before I was torn away from Lily, Eleanor, after my grandmother. She was the last of our line to manifest the healing gift. The gift that had awakened in me these past months, the ability to mend wounds with a touch, to sense sickness, and draw it out of afflicted bodies. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. I reached for his outstretched hand, completing the connection he had hesitated to make. The moment our skin touched, I felt it. The unmistakable resonance of shared blood, the echo of my own nature reflected back at me, not as strong or as complete as the bond I shared with Dominic, but undeniable in its authenticity. "Father," I said, testing the word that had never before passed my lips. Something broke in Nathaniel's expression, years of grief giving way to wonder and cautious joy. Without regard for the hundreds of witnesses, without concern for diplomatic protocol or pack hierarchy, he pulled me into an embrace that felt like coming home to a place I hadn't known existed. Over his shoulder, I met Dominic's gaze, my mate, my balance, watching with an expression of such pure satisfaction that I knew he had suspected this connection. Perhaps not the specific identity of my father, but the possibility that he lived, that he could be found. As Nathaniel released me, wiping unashamedly at the moisture in his eyes, I turned to Dominic with a question in my expression. He nodded slightly, confirming my suspicion. "You knew my father might be alive," I said later, when we had retreated to a private chamber to allow Nathaniel and me a chance to speak away from the curious eyes of the reception. "You suspected he was among the Territory Alphas." Dominic leaned against the doorframe, watching as Nathaniel examined the amber pendant more closely, his expression still cycling between disbelief and joy. "I suspected," he admitted. The timing of his rise to leadership in the Eastern Territory, the reports of his years-long search for a human woman and child, his resistance to Crimson Dawn ideology when many other alphas were tempted by it, it all suggested a personal stake beyond political conviction. Nathaniel looked up from the pendant, his eyes finding Dominic's. "You could have told me," he said, though there was more wonder than accusation in his tone. "When you first suspected who she was." "I could have," Dominic acknowledged. "But some truths need to be discovered rather than told, and some reunions deserve to happen in their own time, in their own way." I understood his reasoning, even as part of me wished I had known sooner. These past months had been filled with so much change, so many revelations about my heritage and abilities. Perhaps adding the discovery of a father I had believed dead would have been too much, too soon. "What happens now?" I asked, looking between the two men who, in very different ways, had shaped my destiny. Nathaniel straightened, some of the alpha reasserting itself after the emotional shock. "Now we forge a new alliance," he said firmly. "The Eastern Territory stands with the royal pair. My pack, my resources, my warriors, all dedicated to your vision of united territories, of balance restored." It was a significant commitment, one that would shift the political landscape considerably. With the Eastern Territory openly allied with us, others would follow, either from conviction or from pragmatic recognition of where power now flowed. "And personally," I pressed, not willing to let the diplomatic answer stand alone. My father's expression softened. "Personally, I would like to know my daughter, to make up for 23 years of absence, if you'll permit it. I would like that," I said simply, feeling a piece of myself that had always been hollow begin to fill. Later that night, After Nathaniel had returned to the Eastern delegation's quarters with promises to speak more in the days ahead, Dominic and I stood once again on the balcony, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. A father, I mused, still turning the reality over in my mind like a newly discovered gem, a royal bloodline more complex than we realized, the daughter of an Eastern alpha and a human woman who may have been more than she seemed. I shook my head, overwhelmed by the implications. Who am I becoming, Dominic? He turned to me, taking both my hands in his. You're becoming who you were always meant to be, Eleanor. Not half of anything, but wholly yourself. A bridge between worlds, between bloodlines, between the past and the future we're creating together. I looked down at our joined hands, at the silver and black marks that symbolized our union. When I grabbed you at that mating ceremony, I was just trying to escape Damon. I never imagined that you were claiming your destiny. His smile held all the warmth of the setting sun. Sometimes the most important choices are made by instinct rather than calculation. Your wolf knew what your human mind couldn't comprehend, and now? Now we continue what we've begun. He drew me closer, his arms encircling my waist. We hunt down the remaining Crimson Dawn cells. We strengthen the alliances between territories. We restore the balance that was lost centuries ago. His voice dropped, becoming more intimate. And perhaps, when the time is right, we consider the next generation of the United Royal Line. The thought sent a shiver of both anticipation and trepidation through me. A child with our combined heritage would be something unprecedented. A perfect balance of life and death, of creation and destruction, of human flexibility and wolf power. Not yet, I said, though not in rejection of the idea. There's still too much to do, too much to learn. Of course. Dominic pressed a kiss to my forehead. We have time, Eleanor. For the first time in centuries, the future stretches before us with possibility rather than inevitable decline. As if in response to his words, a howl rose from the forest beyond the royal grounds, a lone wolf calling to the rising moon. Another joined it, then another, the voices blending in harmony rather than competition. From the garden below came an answering howl, higher and less practiced. Lily, the orphaned cub, joining the chorus from her human form. I closed my eyes, feeling the pull of my own wolf, the desire to add my voice to the others. No longer did I fear the change. No longer did I dread the partial, painful transformation that had marked me as broken and incomplete. Now I understood that I had never been broken, merely different, uniquely balanced between worlds in ways that others couldn't comprehend. Go on, Dominic murmured, releasing me with a knowing smile. I'll join you shortly. Without hesitation, I stepped back and let my wolf emerge. The transformation smooth and painless now, flowing like water finding its natural course. In moments, a white wolf stood where Eleanor Gray had been, powerful and whole, neither human nor beast, but a perfect synthesis of both. I leapt from the balcony, a feat impossible in human form, but effortless in this one, landing gracefully in the garden below. Lily's delighted gasp reached my sensitive ears as she recognized me, her small hands reaching out to touch my fur with wonder. Soon, Dominic joined us, his massive black wolf form materializing beside mine in a fluid transformation that still took my breath away. Together, we led Lily to the forest edge, where other wolves waited, royal guards, visiting pack members, servants who had shed their human responsibilities with their human forms. Under the light of the rising moon, we ran as a pack, as wolves had done since the first shifting. But unlike the packs of old, divided by territory and bloodline and rigid hierarchy, ours moved in harmony, diverse yet united, each individual valued for their unique contributions to the whole. As we raced through the moonlit forest, my white fur a beacon beside Dominic's midnight black, I felt a sense of completion I had never known in all my years of hiding and shame. This was what I had been born for. Not to be half of anything, but to be the bridge between worlds, the living embodiment of balance restored. The amber pendant still hung at my throat, even in wolf form, a reminder of where I had come from and how far I had traveled. My mother's words, spoken as she pressed it into my small hand so many years ago, had proven prophetic. Sometimes what makes you different is what makes you strong. The flower that poisons the wolf also heals the human. The half-blood who belonged nowhere now belonged everywhere. The servant girl who had hugged a king in desperation had become a queen in her own right. Not through accident or calculation, but through the simple courage to embrace her true nature. As the pack howled in unison, our voices rising to touch the stars, I added my own distinct call. Not in mourning for what was lost, but in celebration of what had been found. Balance, purpose,